All right, people, let's do this. Oh, wait, my screen is not. Oh, it's recording. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Herpetology Monday afternoon edition. Happy to be here today. The weather is nice. We got a lot of stuff on our plates. Second half of the semester is going to be great. We're going to get out a lot, do a lot of field trip stuff, look at a lot of animals in situ, which is a fancy way of saying where they live. It's going to be good. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and just jump into what we're doing today. We got a lot on our agenda. We're going to pick up and talk about functional morphology a bit. And our agenda today looks like this. Princeton's going to actually let me rearrange. Hold on. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to rearrange this because of recent requests from people to rearrange our agenda. And so I just need a second to do this. Okay, so we are going to start off. Princeton is going to give a lecture on functional morphology with some examples in reptiles. So this is picking up on the topic we started before break. I lectured a little bit about some of the work with the Podarcis lizards in Cincinnati. We saw some examples of that, and Princeton's going to pick up with that today. And then we're going to review the paper that you read for today on Podarcis moralis functional morphology. And we're going to review that paper as a group in a format. Well, your assignment for today was to write a 1 to 2 sentence summary of that paper at a level that a middle schooler could understand. And we're going to work through that paper following the same, the same questions that I asked you on your primary literature assignment. So we'll do that as a group. Then before break, midway through class, I'll give you your exams back. I have them graded, share the class scores and all of that good stuff with you so you can have those back. We'll take a short break. After that, we're going to launch into primary literature assignment number 2. I'm going to give you that assignment. It's due in a couple of weeks. I want to set you up with it, answer questions, and clarify a few things. And then Wednesday, we have our mud puppy trip. We're going to try for the 4th time to do this damn trip. Hopefully it will work. I got an email from Ryan this morning saying he's the researcher at OSU that's doing the work. He said the conditions right now look great. If we get a lot of rain in the next couple of days, that might change, but right now we're a go. He's excited to have us out there on Wednesday. So I want to just debrief a few things with that trip and expectations for that. And then we had some other things planned, but instead the weather is really nice. This is prime weather for our northern water snakes emerging from hibernation along the Delaware Run here. So we're going to take the last bit of class and go outside and see if any snakes are out moving out from hibernation. Give me a chance to talk about their ecology a little bit, how they overwinter, where they overwinter, and hopefully we'll see some. I checked it last week on a day that I thought was great. Didn't see anything. Ethan was out there earlier today. He didn't see anything moving yet, which is a little surprising because this is right about the conditions and the time of the year when they start to poke their little heads up from their hibernacula. It looks like it's pretty warm out there right now, so I think we could have good luck. It'll be worth going out there, and if nothing else, I could talk a little bit about how they make their living in the world along the Delaware Run there. So that is the plan for today. Before Princeton dives in and talks about functional morphology here, what questions do you have about course structure or anything? Yep, go ahead, Jason.
This is looking really far in advance, but I was looking at the syllabus for exam 2, and it says that functional morphology and thermal biology is on exam 1.
Yes.
Are we pushing it back to exam 2 and adding it, or are we just kind of like going over it? It will test them.
Great, you're way ahead on the syllabus. I love it. So in the syllabus originally, I had planned on the functional morphology, thermal biology stuff to be covered on exam 1. We're just kind of pushing things back. Some things took longer. So this will be on exam 2. Basically, everything that we're covering today forward will be on exam 2. And also some things that we've covered already that weren't on exam 1. So specifically the stuff we've already talked about with functional morphology, you can expect that on exam 2 as well. And thanks for asking that. It's a good clarifying question. And remember that exam 2 is during this class's slotted final exam time. It's on like a Monday evening, I think, in May 2nd or 3rd or something like that. Yeah. So we'll have a little like Monday exam party. And that's not the word I'm going for. Yeah, so keep that on your mind for your schedule too. Yeah, thanks. And I'll give you plenty of advance indication of what topics will be covered on the exam. I'm sure we'll coordinate a review session or something like that too. Yeah, we'll do some. Yeah, we'll plan something. I can't imagine we wouldn't. Ethan, go ahead. Can the box turtles come to the exam party? We'll have to see how they're feeling. Maybe. Yeah, so we should see the turtles too. We should do that at some point. Yeah, for the most part, although that's another, I'll tell you about that later on. Yeah, there's a little bit of issue. All right, other questions? All right, I'm gonna hand it over to Princeton then. He's gonna talk about functional morphology.
Yes. All right, get ready for the best topic known to man. Functional morphology. All right. By the way, so the way that I put these slides together, they don't really have that much text. And so I'm going to be talking and explaining what is really important. So if you need me to repeat anything or just clarify anything, tell me. Cool. All right. So what is functional morphology? Let's get into it. All right, so we talked about this a little bit earlier, especially in terms of the podaresis work that we're doing. But the main idea behind, functional morphology is that there is this paradigm between morphology, performance, and fitness. And morphology actually influences performance, which influences fitness. So let's break that down a little bit and see what we mean. So morphology is just simply the body structure of an organism. And so, for instance, on the top here, you see a basilisk lizard. And can you see the cursor? No, you can't. But yeah, so on the top here, you see a basilisk lizard and its very enlarged feet. And if you take a closer look at these feet, you see that they have these little fringes on their toes, which allows them to run on water like they're famous for. And on the bottom here, you see a Draco lizard gliding through the trees. And you see this like very enlarged flaps of skin on the side of this lizard, which allows them to catch the air and glide for long distances. So morphology is the body structure of an organism. So that influences performance. And performance is just how that organism carries out tasks in its environment.
Can I catch you up for 1
Yes.
second? I'm worried that the Zoom isn't recording the right screen, so let me just adjust this real quick because I had to fiddle with this beforehand. I want to make sure that it's getting the PowerPoint slides. Okay, it should be good now. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry.
no worries. Yeah. All right, cool. So performance is just how an organism carries out tasks in its environment. And so we can see on the top here, the basilisk lizard running across the surface of water. And on the bottom, a Draco lizard gliding through the treetops. So body structure or morphology influences performance or the way that these organisms carry out tasks. Additionally, performance in turn influences fitness, which we all know is just a measure of the reproductive success of that individual and how well that individual can survive and pass along its genetic information down to subsequent generations. So to recap, body structure influences the way that these animals perform in nature, and that influences how well they survive and reproduce. Pretty simple. But this paradigm is actually extremely simplified and does not take into account a whole bunch of other factors which could actually influence this paradigm. So we see that, environment influences the paradigm. So if I were to, let's say, move the basilisk to the ice of the Antarctic, right? It wouldn't do very well because it'd just die. So environment plays a big role in determining how this paradigm operates. Another aspects that influence this paradigm is behavior. Organisms can change their behavior to influence performance or fitness. Physiology and mating and reproductive success have a huge impact on how fit that organism is. And also parasite load can influence the ability of an organism to perform. It can even change their morphology, and it can obviously change how well that individual can reproduce. So let's move on to our little friend, This is a Toki gecko, and Toki geckos are widely studied, especially sort of in the fact that they have these incredible toe pads, right? So we all know that geckos are really cool because they can walk up walls, they can walk up glass, and these toe pads allow them to do that. So if we were to take a closer look at sort of the microstructures of these toe pads, we would see that they have these sort of hair-like projections on the surface of these toe pads on the bottom of their feet. And these hair-like projections are called setae. And they are really interesting because they actually interact at an atomic level with the material that the gecko is on. And so basically, the setae of this gecko interacts with van der Waals forces, or molecular forces of the substrate, and it allows them to sort of climb up extremely smooth substrates. That's pretty cool. And so that's a really good example of how morphology is not only important on like a very large, body morphology scale. So like the wings of the Draco lizard, but it's also very important on this really tiny, fine micro morphology scale. And those have really, really big impacts on how an organism performs in nature. So we've all heard the terms, specialist versus generalist in terms of like ecology, right? But when we're talking about this, sort of not two-way interaction, but like two different distinctions in the functional morphology realm, we mean this, right? So a specialist is just an animal that has a morphology that allows them to perform a task or a very small number of tasks extremely well. So for instance, this is a sandfish skink, and we'll talk much more about these guys in the coming lectures. But these guys are really interesting because they have really, really sort of adapted morphology, and that allows them to very easily sort of swim throughout the sand. And so you can see they have this sort of shovel nose, and they have really cool fringes on their toes, and they have a very, sort of slick body design, which allows them to really pass through that sand. Alternatively, on the other hand, we have a generalist, and these guys are basically just the opposite of a specialist, right? So they're animals that have a morphology which allows them to perform a large number of tasks, not as well as a specialist. And a great example of that is a lizard that you're all familiar with, the Podarcis moralis, or the common wall lizard. And so these guys aren't really great at any one thing, but they are good enough at a lot of different things. And that's what makes them a generalist. And it's important to note that these sort of categories are very dictated by their morphology. So like I said, the sandfish skink has a very, derived morphology, which allows them to very easily swim throughout the sand. But the Podarcis lizards don't really have that, right? And so they can't swim throughout the sand. They can't glide like a Draco lizard. They can't run across, run across water like a basilisk lizard. They're just a little lizard dude. All right, so I wanted to highlight some really cool examples of specialist morphology. And so here on the top left, you see a spider-tailed horn viper. And those guys are super cool because if you can see that like little spider-like thing that's crawling around is basically just the tail of this viper. And
you see the viper in there?
Yeah, it's super well camouflaged. It's incredible. Basically, the reason they do this is to lure birds to attack that like little spider lure, and then the viper will actually attack the bird and eat it.
Where is the tail? How is it moving?
Here, the tail.
No, I know, but like, where's the?
This is the head of the viper, And like its body is like curled up along this, and then this is like the lure of the viper. And this is the whole tail. See? It's really, really well camouflaged, and that's what makes them a really great example of a specialist morphology. All right, yeah. So that's spider-tailed horned viper. I guess here on the bottom left, we have a really great example. So on the bottom left, this is a hairy frog. And what's really interesting about these guys is that, you can see, on the legs and sort of the sides of the frog, like right here, it's very hairy, right? And so these are just projections of the frog's skin, and it allows them to increase the surface area of their skin so that they can better absorb oxygen in the water. So these hairy frogs live in very high altitude, bodies of water, and there's not a lot of oxygen there. So they would have to, specialize their morphology to better be able to survive in this sort of extreme environment. Additionally, with these guys, the hairy frog is also called the wolverine frog because of a really, really incredible defense mechanism by which they can like literally break the bones of their fingers and toes and like poke them out of their skin like Wolverine from X-Men and stab like potential attackers, which is pretty freaking metal, dude. So it's pretty cool. Also, sort of on the right here, you see an example of extreme camouflage, right? This is a mossy leaf-tailed gecko. And it's super hard to identify where the gecko begins and where the tree ends. And so that's just a really great example of how well camouflage can work and how well these specialist morphologies can do what they do. Yes. The viper is called a spider-tailed horned viper. Mossy-tailed leaf gecko. Sorry, mossy leaf-tailed gecko. Yeah. All right, cool. So more sort of specialized morphology. On the top left here, we have a pancake tortoise. And aside from being very, very cute, they also have this sort of flattened body, and that allows them to wedge themselves in between the crevices of rocks, and then they'll sort of inflate. And if a predator is like coming to like pry them out of the rocks, they really can't pry them out because they're just in there so well. And on the right here, we see this really interesting example of varied morphology. So there's a lot of variation in the sort of shell morphology of these tortoises on the Galapagos Islands. And it's really interesting because these guys, these sort of morphologies are actually correlated with how much they have to sort of reach up above their shell to get at the vegetation that they eat. And so you see that, like, for instance, this guy, he has this like little projection on his shell, which sort of prevents him from reaching up. So he really only eats things that are on the ground. Whereas this guy has a very long neck, and his sort of neck is free to be able to reach up a lot higher than he is to get at all of the tasty vegetation up there. Also, on sort of the bottom left here, we see a fly river turtle. And these guys are really cool because they are the only non-sea turtle with flippers. And so basically they are super, super good at swimming and really good at swimming fast. But if you catch them on land, they suck at moving and they're not very good at doing anything else but swimming. Sorry? Which ones? The individual ones? So like this guy and this guy?
Yes.
So this is the pancake tortoise, and this is the fly river turtle. All right, so another really important concept to understand is this concept of trade-offs, right? So, like I said, this morphology performance fitness paradigm is very simplified, and it really changes a lot when the environment changes. So beneficial morphology in one environment is not always beneficial in other environments. For instance, if we were to take a polar bear, right? Its morphology is very beneficial in the areas that it lives in, but if you move that polar bear to like the freaking Nevada desert, it won't do well. It will die. Sad polar bear. Yeah, so organisms can't be great at everything. And so they have to undergo a trade-off. And the trade-off is just a situation in which evolution can't actually enhance one trait without hindering another. So for instance, like the example of a polar bear, right? It's obviously great at surviving in very cold temperatures, but it's not going to be great at surviving in warm temperatures because you can't do both. Yeah, so let's go back to our little friend, the Toki Gecko, right? It's very, very good at climbing up walls and living in the trees and doing everything that a Toki Gecko does. But if we were to move that gecko to the desert, let's say, it won't do very well. It'll be very sad because its morphology is just not adapted at all to be able to survive in this extreme desert environment. Yeah. All right. So more examples. Yes.
Environments that change. Is this like not apply as much? Because like deserts, for example, like it's really, really hot and really, really cold. Or like tide pools where the water is like in and out very, very rapidly. Like they have to be, the organisms have to be able to survive in both instances. So like, is that an exception to this rule?
Not necessarily. And that's a great example of how behavior can actually alter this morphology performance fitness paradigm, right? So for instance, if I was a creature living in the desert and I couldn't withstand the desert heat, I could like go underground to sort of shield myself from that extreme temperature and only come out when it's colder at night. So that's a great example of how behavior can modify this morphology performance fitness paradigm.
Also, with animals that live in like a desert that are exposed to extreme cold and extreme heat, would they also be more likely to be like generalist morphologies? Is that, I guess because they would need both, maybe a morphology for both. Or is that more of like just interacting with the environment on this? I guess heat is.
Yeah, no, that's really actually very good. I don't actually know the answer. Do you know the answer?
I think what you want to think about here is maybe not morphology in this case, but physiology, like their ability to function across the temperature range. And Princeton, what he said before applies here as well, is that this is where behavior becomes really important, because maybe you're only active when it's a certain temperature, maybe you're only active during a certain season or during a time of day. And that way you don't have to deal with those extremes because you just avoid it. Having said that, there are great examples of organisms. So you think about organisms that live in Ohio, right? The wall lizards are a great example. They got to be able to deal with winter temperatures when it's below freezing, as well as summer temperatures when it's like above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Huge range of temperatures. In the tropics, most organisms are only exposed to a much more limited range of temperatures. You think about Florida. most of the time. It doesn't actually get really all of that hot, and it doesn't really get all that cold. And so they're over evolutionary time, they're only adapted to a much narrower range of temperatures physiologically. And so they can't respond to either really hot or cold. Usually really hot they can, but they can't really respond to cold temperatures. That's why like the green iguanas fall out of trees in Florida when you get a cold snap. They're just not, they're not built for those kind of cold temps, where our wall lizards are perfectly fine. So, you know, Princeton's presenting this morphology performance fitness paradigm, but another way that it can be expanded is to think about physiology and performance as well, not just morphology. And we'll get into that a little bit when we talk about thermal biology coming up. That's a great question, Jason.
Yes,
Can I add a little note on that?
sure.
I would say in every environment, you're gonna find specialists and generalists as well. And there's always gonna be niches that are available to like take advantage of. So in like a typical example like you gave, you have animals that are specialized in that like coming and going of the tides, even show specialized behavior and adaptations. But then you always have like general animals coming in as well as the opportunity presents itself. So it just kind of depends on every individual case. There's always gonna be some specialists and some generalists in every environment.
Yeah, good point. Any other questions before we move on?
Or is it just like, I guess I don't really understand that concept.
Yeah.
Like, is a generalist just like an animal that doesn't have specialized features to do? I guess all animals have specialized features to survive, but like not exceptional.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think an animal that does okay in a variety of situations, like the wall lizards is a great example. They can climb pretty well, but they're not the best climbers. They can run pretty fast, but they're not the best runners. They can go underground, but they're not the best at being underground. But they can do all of those things pretty well. Versus, let's say, a species that's really, really good at climbing, has limbs and toe pads that make it very adept for climbing up trees, but then they suck if you put them on flat ground and running, right? And so then in that case, it would be a specialist. You can think about it too. Let me think about another example. The fly river turtle is a good example. They're really good at swimming, but if you stick them on land, like they just kind of lumber around.
So I guess a different analogy that I'm kind of thinking of is like dogs and how they have like their specialized groups, like the working group, like, you know, like a dog show. But there's like some dogs that are kind of like everything.
Yeah, that's exactly the same idea. You get really good at one thing versus kind of good at a whole bunch of different things. And depending on what the selective pressures are over evolutionary time, how those different traits are related to each other genetically is going to determine what the ultimate outcome of those adaptations look like at the end of the day. And like Ethan said, there's a lot of ways to make a living in different environments. Sometimes that specialization is what drives a certain evolutionary path. Sometimes generalists is a different path.
Yeah.
Is it the example I'm thinking of for the question to ask is the moths, like the saltpeter moths of the Industrial Revolution? Does that happen a lot where an organism changes between a specialist and a generalist, like within evolutionary time fast?
I don't think so.
Not really.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use that as an example. Of
Yeah.
special genus. That's an example of where there's a specific form of directional selection on a specific trait, in that case color, favoring one color over another. So it's not necessarily related to how its shape relates to its performance like here, but it's more of just this one specific thing.
Cool. All right, let's move on. All right, so I just wanted to give you some examples of trade-offs. So there's this really famous example of a trade-off between how fast and how fast an organism is able to run, so sprint speed and endurance, right? So we see this little lizard running along. So for instance, if I was a really fast individual, I would likely not be able to run as long. Versus if I were like a really slow individual, I would likely be able to run a lot more. So for instance, think of like a cheetah, right? Cheetahs are extremely specialized to have this incredible burst speed and to be able to run at extremely high speeds. But they can't run that long, really. And for instance, think of like the human for a really good example as an endurance runner. Humans are not really going to be able to outrun anything in the animal kingdom, but what makes us really great is that we can run for a long time and we can just outrun everything. Another great example is this sort of sprint speed versus maneuverability. And we touched on that a little bit in the paper, right? So the faster you go, the more likely you are to just run into stuff because you can't control your motion at that high of a speed. Yeah, so that's not very fun. Another great example of a trade-off is between climbing and clinging. And so we found this in Podarcis, whereby like, Podarcis lizards who are better at climbing are actually worse at clinging and vice versa. So that's just a really cool example of more trade-offs, especially in performance. So the next idea that is really important to know is this idea of sort of structural habitat, right? So what is structural habitat? Well, structural habitat is just the physical structure of a particular environment. And a sort of subfacet of that structural habitat is the substrate that that organism is on. And so substrate is just the material that an organism is on at any one particular point in time. So we all know that organisms live in a variety of different places, from trees to like rocky outcrops to deserts to marine environments and even to freshwater ecosystems. So we know that an organism's morphology, of course, interacts with its environment to shape performance, hence the idea of trade-offs. It's really important to recognize that this relationship is very environment specific. So if the organism is moved to a suboptimal environment, for instance, if we were to take this turtle and just chuck it in the desert, it won't do very well because its morphology is very adapted to living in these freshwater aquatic systems. So structural habitat is really the main determinant of how these organisms, perform in its environment, right? So structural habitat really, really determines if an environment is good or not for an organism to live in. Yeah. And that brings us to the best topic, urbanization. So urban environments are really interesting for a few different reasons, right? So first, they are relatively new, like evolutionarily speaking. Second, they are just so unlike any other environment, right? So where you're going to find environments that have concrete, that have plastic and glass and so many humans and metal. Yeah, so the structural habitat characteristics of the urban environment are unlike any other environment on the planet. And so organisms living in these novel urban environments have to come up with really interesting and creative ways to be able to survive and to perform well enough to reproduce and to be fit in this highly novel, highly variable environment. Urban environments also influence morphological evolution, right? So we know that if you go back to the morphology, performance, fitness paradigm, there's obviously going to be selection on varied morphologies, which ultimately translates into differences in fitness, right? So for instance, if I was a lizard who had short limbs, so I couldn't climb very well, and I was stuck in this urban environment, versus if versus if like my brother was also a lizard who had longer limbs and was able to climb better in this urban environment, I probably would die sooner because I wouldn't be able to climb as fast to escape predators, and my fitness would be drastically reduced. So my brother lizard, who had the long limbs, would be able to better survive and reproduce and better pass on his long limb traits to his offspring. And that's just an example of how environment really influences this morphological evolution. Cool. So this little friend is an anole right here. He's very cute. And anoles are really interesting because they have lived in urban environments for a pretty decent amount of time, enough to be able to have some morphological change. And they have been pretty well studied in terms of, you know, how do urban environments actually influence evolution? So some things to note about anoles are that just like geckos, they have these toe pads, which allows them to climb up very smooth surfaces. And in their natural environment, they actually live in trees, as you can see on the sort of bottom picture here. What's interesting about anoles is that in urban environments, they actually display longer limbs than they do in these sort of natural forest environments. Whereas with our favorite lizard, the Podarcis, they are very, generalist lizard. Both of them are pretty generalist, and they live on these sort of rocky outcrops in nature. And in these urban environments, they live in the cracks and crevices of stone walls and of buildings. They're a lot more terrestrial than the anole lizards are. And when we look at differences in morphology between like natural populations of Podarcis and urbanized populations, we see that they actually display shorter limbs. So I'm going to open it up to the floor. My question is, why do you think these two lizard groups display very different changes in morphology when, presented with the same urban environment? Yes.
They take like different ecological features. So like these have the anoles like higher trees naturally, so they're probably gonna, because it's not shared paths, they're probably gonna want to be up higher. So they might need longer ones to climb those weird surfaces. And then the Podarcis, they like the ground, and so they probably don't need long limbs. They can just chill, like crawl around on the ground. They don't need that extra elevated reach that they might need in their natural environment.
Perfect. Spot on. Amazing. Yeah, that's exactly what it is, right? Amazing. So it's really important to note that responses to urbanization are highly taxon specific. So what does this mean, right? It means that two groups like anoles and Podarcis lizards are not going to respond the same way to urbanization because, like Sid said, they use their environment in completely different ways. Anoles preferring a more sort of arboreal lifestyle, in which in urban environments, they are hanging out on the sides of buildings and climbing up posts and stuff like that. Whereas Podarcis are, chilling on the ground and hanging out in the cracks in walls and are just going to be more on the ground and terrestrial than are these anole lizards. And so these differences in the way that these two lizards use their habitat is really going to drive these changes that we see in morphology when it comes to urban environments. Great, yeah. That's it. Does anyone have any questions? Cool.
Excellent. So some more details on functional morphology. What I'd like to do now is transition and keep talking about this topic, but I'm going to skip ahead on my slides here and go to the paper that you read for today. So this is the paper with Princeton as the first author. You can see this is us after it was just published. We're very excited about it. I want to talk about this, and I want to do so in the format that matches what the questions that I ask for your primary lit assignment. So go ahead and get this paper handy, either if you have it printed out or your PDF. Will, if you don't mind getting the lights, actually, I'm gonna. And what I want to do is just walk through, and this gives us a chance to debrief this paper specifically, but also make sure that you understand what questions you need to respond to for the primary lit assignment. So the first question for the primary lit assignment is, let me just make sure this is still recording. Yep, we're good. Is a full citation for your selected paper. So what's that going to look like? Let's just start with that. What's the first part of a citation? Author's names. Yep, it always starts with the first author and the last name, right? And then it has initials, and then it's going to have McQueen. In this case, it's 3 authors. And that was Wyatt, and then we have Gangloff, EJ. So now there are some different journals have different formats. If you've ever been taught like this is the way you need to cite something, and it always needs to be that way, it doesn't really work that way. At least in the sciences, every journal has their own specific details of citation format, and it kind of sucks, to be honest, because it's a giant thing. But what I care about is the information you're including, not necessarily all of the specifics of like what order that information is in. Having said that, all citations start with the last name of the first author. And so that is always going to be the first part of your citation. Now, just as a quick aside, in science journals, when you see a list of author names, the first author is the person who kind of drove the work, generally who wrote the paper, who kind of motivated the study to happen, and is kind of the person kind of most responsible for getting it out. It's often, when students are involved with the project, it's often like the lead student. Hence, that's why Princeton is the lead author for this paper. Wyatt is in the middle because he's a student, he contributed, but he wasn't the lead on the study. He was a contributing person, but he didn't take the lead on drafting it. The last name on the list is usually, it's what we call the senior author. And that is like the principal investigator of the research team, the person with the I guess the most experience or whatever, right? So in this case, that's me from the lab. So the citation always starts with the list of names. What other information we want to include in this citation? The year always has to be in there. 2021. In this case, I'm just going to put a period here and then put that. Some journals have the year in bold, some have it italicized, whatever. I don't care. I just want to make sure you have the year. You don't need to give me month or anything like that, only the year. Good. What other information do we need? Title. Good. And the title of this study is Moving to the City, right?
Yeah.
It's too long. I'm not going to write all of it. So I'm going to write this and then write ellipses, right? But you should have the full title is generally what's up there. Most often this is in quotation marks to set it aside so we know that it's the title, right? And we have the whole title there. What other information we want to have in a citation?
The journal is italicized.
The journal name, yep. In this case, I'm going to use the abbreviation biological, journal, Linnaean Society. Sometimes you'll see these abbreviated, sometimes you'll see them spelled out. I'm going to underline it here. Sometimes you'll see them italicized usually, but I can't italicize my own. I'm going to put a period after that too. Actually, I'm not going to put a period. We've got that. Good so far? Does that make sense? Okay, next, what do we have? Volume. Usually we can skip the issue. We don't care about the issue so much. So what's the volume for this one? I don't remember. 84. You guys have the paper? Oh, it's not this.
Volume
134.
and then issue 1.
Okay, so we could skip the issue. That doesn't. If you put it in there, it's fine. Some journals have it, some don't. I'm fine skipping it, but the volume is important. So we have the name of the journal, the volume, and then we have the page numbers, which are
141 to
141 and 153.
and
Good.
then you need the DOI.
Boom. This is a complete citation. This is fine. Very often nowadays, as Sid said, they have the DOI number, which is going to be DOI colon and then like a long string of characters there. You can include that or not. It's really useful to have this because it's like a digital object identifier. It helps you find that this thing anywhere on the internet. You can use this number to find it. For your citation, for our purposes, I'm okay if you don't include it or not. So the key things here they absolutely should have are the author list, the year, the title, bless you, the journal, the volume, the page numbers, and then the DOI will say is optional. So make sure you have all that information there. Yes, Sam. No, so what I'm doing now is I'm going to give you your second primary literature assignment number 2 in class later today. What I'm doing right now is walking through all the questions I'm going to ask you on that assignment with this paper, so you know how to answer them, basically. That makes sense? You did a so job, but I want to make sure you do a better job this time. Every time's improvement. Every time you got to get a little better. And there were some things I realized that I didn't teach you explicitly, but I just asked you to do, like the citation format. So I want to make sure you've got that.
Where did you find the volume journal?
If you go to the actual link to the journal page, it's right there.
Mhm.
So not the download.
No.
Yeah, and the reason for that, because that's actually like a preprint version that I just had that I posted, and that's why it says XXX for the page numbers, but it has the DOI number on it. So if you go to that DOI, if you just cut and paste that DOI into your Google search bar, it'll come up with the journal
Also,
page.
this is just a general thing. I write an APA a lot. Communication does that. Be very, very careful about Google Scholar because a lot of times the citation is not correct. And so you might need to go into the actual journal itself and pull the correct information. It's probably not as useful for this class because it's not as functional, but for other classes like that are really good, you gotta be very careful.
Yeah, that's a good call. If you just go and you go to Google Scholar and just hit like citation and you cut and paste that, you got to double check that because it's not, that's a great advice. Yeah.
And their APA citation also includes the publication number, and you don't need that. So
Great. Yeah, and I don't, like I said, I don't care what format because everyone has a different. I just want these pieces of information in there. Zotero? Yeah. Yeah, it's your, yeah, Princeton uses that. It's good. It's good. If you're doing a lot of stuff with citations, use some type of citation software for sure. All right, Athena, yep. I am agnostic about it. Some places like it, some don't. For our purposes, again, I just want these major pieces of information. Yeah, it's fine. Thanks for asking. That's a good question. All right, number 2 on your primary lit assignment. The second question is, give me 2 or more terms from the paper that are new to you and define them. So you don't have this prepared, but what are 2 terms that were new in this paper to you? Anyone want to share a term off the top of their head? Any new vocabulary words? You can pull one up right. You don't even need to define it. I can define it. Ah, there we go. Good. Libitum? No, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is a Latin term that just means like as needed, right, or as available. What did we say? We provided water ad libitum. So we said yes. So it just means like something is always available. I'll say Latin for always available. I don't know if that's the literal translation, but that's how it means in context there. So, yep, that's all you have to do. So definition here, you just put the word and then you define it, what it is. Yep, Cody.
I got a question for Princeton.
Mhm.
Why did you use the Latin term instead of just write it out? Like, you do it on the paper?
I don't think I wrote that sentence. I think you did.
I might have written that sentence. It's just a short, it's a short, concise way of saying that, and it's commonly done in papers. Yeah, yeah. You just say you provided water ad libitum. It's, I don't know, just standard, I guess. Yeah. You could say we provided water all the time, I guess, but
It's not as fancy.
yeah, it's basically to sound erudite. Yeah.
You know, people say like ad infinitum
Mhm.
a bit more than this. I guess it's the same kind of thing, just kind of word.
It's exactly the same thing, yeah. Mhm. Or ad nauseum, there's another one that's commonly used, right? We didn't provide water ad nauseum, though. Len, you had your hand up.
Is that the way I go from here?
Oh, yeah, Princeton's gonna define this one for us.
Oh, boy. Oh my gosh, now I have to go back to Princeton now. Wait. Okay, so, wait, correct me if I'm wrong. This is your side. Okay.
Whew.
Uh,
I have to often stop and think like, which stylos okay, yeah.
All right, so Zygopodium is just a, how do I explain it? It's like a sort of, not catch-all, but like a just general term for like this part of your body. So like on a human, right? It's basically your forearm, and it's also the part of your leg that's beneath the knee, that's not the foot. Does that make sense?
So the lower part of your leg.
Mhm.
Yeah, like this to this, and
But it's always ventral.
like this to this,
Mhm.
and this to this.
Yep, exactly.
It's always ventral and not dorsal though.
No, it's that whole segment. It's neither ventral nor dorsal, it's the whole thing.
Basically, you can split your limb into 3 parts. You got this part, you got from here to here, and
Then you got,
then
yeah.
down. It's the middle one.
Michaela took vertebrate anatomy. Yep,
No, I was just curious.
Like your elbows down this.
yeah. So it's a, yeah. So it's a common term in all tetrapod vertebrates for the second segment of your limb, applying to upper and lower limbs. So importantly here, let's look on a horse. You gotta look So on this horse here,
I know, right?
this is the shoulder blade or scapula, right? Then we have the first part of the limb, which is called the stylopodium. And in humans, that corresponds to your what we call like the upper arm, and also between your hip and your knee. Then you have the second segment, which is the zygopodium, which corresponds in humans to your forearm, between your wrist and your elbow, between your knee and your ankle. And then here, this bone is actually, well, you have the ankle bones here. So these are the tarsal bones. So that's the same as the bones in our ankle. And then this on a horse is a fuse, but it's homologous to the metatarsals. So the bones that are in your feet that run horizontally. So that's why horses seem to have an extra joint in their leg. They don't really have an extra joint. They just have their ankle joint is like way up high here. And that gives them an extra, essentially an extra pivot point to provide greater locomotion. It's a good example of them being really specialized to be long distance runners. Little vertebrate anatomy there for you. Snakes, on the other hand, have none of this. Go ahead, Ethan.
I just want to say for people who might want to find it on documents, CEU.
ZEU?
Yeah.
it is.
It is?
GEUGO.
Oh, look at that.
Wait,
EU. Oh, wait, did I put ZY?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. I was like, ZEY, that's not right. Zygopodium. Yep, I'm sorry. Thank you, Ethan. Yep. Misspelling there. ZEU. Good. Thank you for doing that. Cool, good. So that part, just 2 words, definitions. That's pretty straightforward, right? The third one is the one I really want to emphasize. And I might just do this one and then skip the rest because the rest are pretty straightforward, or maybe we can come back to this. But the third one, well, I'll make sure we have time for this today. We have a break and I want to give you your exams back. Let's pause here for a second Let's take a quick stretch break. I'll tell you what, let's pause here. Let me give you your exams back. Let's take a quick stretch break and then we'll wrap this up afterwards. Does that sound okay? Although we're a little crunched for time, we'll see what we can do. Okay, so it's back.
Oh, yeah?
Wow. It's because I'm pretty cool. Did anyone get like a perfect score?
Yeah, a bunch of people.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, people did really well. Yeah. Okay, let me just get this set up here. Okay, so here's the results of exam number 1. So a couple important notes about this. The exam was out of a possible 80. So remember, as you see your scores, if you got like a 75, that's not a 75%. That's 75 out of 80, which is a big difference. The class, here's the distribution of scores from the class. So again, the x-axis here is different grades. The y-axis is how many people got those grades. So you can see 8 people got between a 75 and an 80. Notice that the distribution goes up to 90, even though, or between 85 and 90, even though it was out of a possible 80. How can that be, you ask? Well, the reason is the class average was about at 73, which is a 92%. That's pretty good, right? If the average is 92, I was thrilled. I told you in the review session that I wasn't going to ask you to pull common names, or excuse me, Latin names out of nowhere, that I'd only ask you in the context of multiple choice. I then did that on the exam. So what I did was I graded the exams as they were, and then those questions asking you for those species names were worth a total of 8 points. So I just added 8 points to everyone's grade. Now, what this did is essentially made those questions bonus questions, which I don't normally do, but I did here to compensate for my own mistake. And so if you see some scores above 80, that's because you got those questions right and you got the 8 bonus points. Having said that, overall, this class average of 92%, you guys did great. Nice job on that. It was not, I was really happy with the scores. If you have any questions about anything or want to go over anything, let me know. I tried to leave detailed notes about why you did or did not get answers right. But if anything's unclear, or you want to just get more detail, just let me know. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and take our stretch break. Princeton and I will go quickly around the room and pass these out. And let's be back here in like 3 minutes. Let's just take a quick one today. So I want to make sure we can get out and see if we can find any snakes moving. So a whole bunch of you got above an 8 too, which is pretty sweet.
When I saw that up there, I thought that was the percentages on the place. I was like, dang. Oh, that's pretty bad.
The distribution.
Yeah.
Oh, shoot.
All right, everyone get their paper back. We'll take a quick break and we'll get back in just a second. We should be okay for time. We'll be a little rushed, but yep.
Can you go over the most and least of question, whatever it is at the top of page 2? I feel like a lot of us.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yep.
We go out and hang out like for snakes and stuff,
What's that?
like how to look for snakes and I feel like it can be hard if you've never looked for them before, you know? There's a lot of things like you either know what you're looking for or you're just looking at like pieces of debris and stuff.
What else are you doing?
Well, I want to finish looking at.
Oh, you just float. Because that's what I thought it was.
Just go here.
We're gonna do that for our paper?
What's that?
Are we gonna do like that for our paper?
Yeah, I want to keep walking through it. Although I just want to be mindful of the time. But oh, they do. I messed up. I'm sorry. You know why? Because I changed some of the questions in yours from the other exam.
Oh, so you're just like in the habit.
Yeah. So Athena plus 2 points on exam. And so you'll have, yep, nice job. Yeah, yep, thanks for pointing that out. Sorry about that. You're absolutely right. All right, well, I'm seeing everyone still in seats, so let's keep going. Unless you want to take a break. Do we still want to take another 2 minutes or do we need, we good? Let's take another minute. How's that? Actually, I need to run the restroom too. Let's take 1 minute and we'll get back.
That's why I asked you. Oh my gosh, I have my monkeys in my car.
It's the same sort of idea.
Oh, I don't, I'm right. Oh, is that a no, I knew the answer. I have no clue what that is. Like.
That's my answer for Monday.
Okay, for everybody or just for me? We'll talk about it later. Okay, talk about it later. I'm gonna start the class right now. Yep. All right, let's go. I have one question about the exam I want to field first. So the question about which group of reptiles is the most and least speciose? What were the answers to that? Okay, Ellen, what's the most? Squamates contain close to 10,000 species, right? Good. What group of reptiles has the least number of species? Lennon. Tuatara has how many? One species, right? So that was the answer I was looking for those ones. Good. Somebody in the class actually selected mammals, which I was expecting you to only pick from the groups of reptiles. But in fact, there are more squamate species than there are mammal species. So even accounting for that, which is pretty amazing. All the mammals in the world, there's still more lizards and snakes and amphisbaenians than there are mammals. Yeah, good.
it's there.
All right. I will gladly answer questions individually about your exams. We'll make sure that that can happen. In the meantime, I want to continue walking through this paper. And I want to look at step 3 of your primary lit assignment. This is the one where I saw the most struggle, so I want to make sure that we spend some time on it. Question number 3 asks you what data were collected. So what was actually measured in the study. So for the paper you read for today, what data were actually collected? Go ahead, Ethan, give me one.
Sprint speed.
Sprint speed. Okay, good. Give me another one. Alan. Limb dimensions. Good. Michaela. Body temperature. Good. What else was measured? What's that? Climbing speed. Good. Although for this paper, well, I guess sprinting speed at an angle for this one, but yep. Yep. So sprint speed. Yeah, that's really about it. That was our data. Body dimensions, which are units in millimeters. Sprint speed, which was meters per second, right? And then what's the temperature? Thank you. Which is of course degrees Celsius. And so the reason I'm always asking you this question is because I want you to remember that all of these research studies are all the data are numbers, right? We have to have numbers that quantify something. And then we can use those numbers to test our hypotheses. Now, you all formed hypotheses about how body size and temperature might affect lizard sprinting speed with that mini experiment we did in class last week. And we're going to analyze those data. We're going to have to push that back to next week at this point. That's okay. But we need numbers to test those hypotheses. I saw on the first primary lit assignment on the venom paper, which admittedly is a little bit complicated, that sometimes people for this answer, you'd put things like, well, what data were actually measured? They tested if venom varied across different snakes. True, that's what they did, but what did they measure to do that? Always come back to what numbers were actually collected and analyzed. And I think it's really important to remember that all of these studies, no matter how complicated they seem or how many different data sets they bring together, at the end of the day, you're measuring something. And I want to know what that thing is that you're measuring, right? You know, you're measuring more than one thing, like body dimensions that Alan said. You know, we measured the toe length, we measured the metatarsus length, we measured the limb, the zygopodium, the stylopodium, the body length, the shoulder girdle. Like there's a lot of those measurements. But at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. It's all just using calipers to get a length in millimeters, right? And so I think this takes a little bit of the mystery out of some scientific studies too, about what is actually being conducted. And we'll see some examples in this class of studies with the mud puppies. We'll see some with the salamanders, research we have going on. You'll see some with the snakes about what the data are that we actually collect. Does that sound okay? All right. Let's move on to number 4. What specific question do you have about the methods or the techniques? What question do you have about this paper, about methods or techniques? SK, yep. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. You said figure 6. Yeah, let me pull that up. Here we go. Let's go to figure 6. Figure 3, figure 4. Oh yeah. Do you want to answer this one, Princeton?
Sure. All right, so this is really confusing if you look at it without knowing what it is. But basically, this is a correlation matrix. So what this does is it's sort of like a grid, and we can basically test, or not test, but we can sort of visualize how these different conditions that we ran the lizard on actually, you know, are, that's that's not a good way to explain it. Basically, we can sort of visualize how, what's a better way to say what I'm trying to say?
We look at the relationship between a lizard's ability to run under one condition and another condition.
Perfect.
It's each individual is one data point, and then we put all of those together basically. So it's actually, and so in that sense, it's looking at if an individual that runs faster on incline, cork, and with obstacles, if that animal also runs faster if it's flat and cork and obstacles. And because the correlation coefficient is positive, that means yes. Animals generally that ran good when it was flat and cork also ran good when it was incline and cork. And the information up here at the top and the bottom is the exact same. Only the bottom shows you numbers and the top shows you graphically. So for example, there's a really strong and negative correlation between lizards that ran on incline cork with obstacles and flat sandpaper, no obstacles, right? If you're good on one of those things, you're really bad on the other. So you see a big negative number here and you see a big orange circle here. So those two things mean the same thing, it's just shown differently. At the same time, like there's a positive correlation, say between if you're running on flat cork with obstacles and flat turf with obstacles, you have this positive correlation. You see a big blue circle here, and then you see a big positive number here. It's just a grid to show all of those different correlations because there's so many different combinations. There's like 62 combinations or something like that. Well, each one is the, what would it be? The average.
The average of
Yeah.
all of the lizards running on that condition.
Yep. Good question, Steve. The takeaway point here is that for your literature assignment, that's all you need to do is one question, something you didn't get. You don't even have to answer that question. I just want to know that you read it carefully and you're thinking about it and that there's something maybe you didn't understand you'd like to learn more about. Cool. Number 5 is the strength of the paper and number 6 is the weakness of the paper. We'll skip 6 because there's no weaknesses for this paper. No, just kidding. Give me one strength of this paper. What's one thing this paper did well? Looked at a lot of different conditions, right? I wouldn't disagree. I think that was a novel aspect of the study for sure. SK, jump in. One more time. You have some good background information. Yep. So it can be about the study design itself, like Ethan alluded to, or it can be about the way the study is presented, like SK said. Yep, that's great. Sid, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, the way that it's written it's very, very easy to read, even if you don't know, like, all of the intricacies of what it actually is doing.
Love to see that.
Yep, yep.
Because that's something that a lot of papers I've read do not do well.
Yeah, and that can be a strength too, right? Absolutely, the way it's presented. So that's the strength of paper. So when you're doing this, you need to write a sentence or two explaining exactly that. A weakness of this paper. What's the weakness of this study? We only use males. Yeah. So we can't really draw conclusions about juveniles or about females of this same species. Huge weakness of this and many other similar studies. Good. What's another weakness? Go ahead, Catherine.
You can't get performance measures of the historical specimens.
We can't get performance. Yes, that is sadly, although with machine learning, we might be able to infer that with some great degree of accuracy. But yeah, we can't run dead animals. It's true. Sadly true. Abby, go ahead.
A lot of the historical specimens.
So we're just limited by the stuff that we had at hand. Yep. And that's exactly, and that's a fair criticism of a paper to say their sample size was small. You know, it might not be anything that the authors had even had control of, but that's a legitimate critique of the science that happened. Good, good. Okay, and then one idea for a follow-up experiment. You've generally been doing a great job with this and what I've seen. Some really creative ideas. In this case, what's one example of a follow-up experiment that might be interesting to do besides bringing dead lizards back to life and running them? Go ahead, Lynn.
Maybe try it with female juveniles.
Yeah, perfect. follow up. And that this often can tie to the weakness, you know, what's a way to expand it? Chase, what do you think is a good?
I'm gonna say in a different species that's also in an urban environment that also thrives in that.
Totally, especially since what Princeton was just saying about how it's very taxon specific, this response to urbanization. Be interesting to do with others. Yeah, cool. So that is the gist of what I'm looking for this primary lit assignment. With that in mind, let me go ahead and where are we here? Give you some your next assignment. Your primary literature assignment number 2 is going to be due 2 weeks from today on Monday, April 4th. There's details of this in your class program. You have a class program for next week, Monday. I didn't make it for Wednesday because we have the outing, which I'll talk about in a second. It goes for a week, but the details are in there. Some important notes to use here. First, I just talked about this. Make sure, and bless you, in the section about what data were collection, really think about what numbers were actually used in analysis. If you're not sure about this, shoot me an email, or we could talk before or after class or in open hours or whenever, and we can make sure that you understand that. The paper should be recent, so since 2015. And if you're interested in potentially submitting your summary to the Herpetological Review for publication, as students in this class have done in the past, you should pick a more recent paper. You should pick one from 2021 or 2022, because the whole idea there is they're publishing summaries of recent research. Now, in your when you submit this, I'm going to ask you a question about whether or not this is something you want to pursue. If you do want to pursue this, what it will take is probably some extra work in terms of some extra drafts of this summary with some rewriting based on feedback from me and others. And then we can submit it. It's a publication in a pretty widely read journal. It's different than like publishing scientific literature, but it's something you can put on your CV and something like that. Those of you interested in a career in science, it can only help. And I'd be happy to, I'll work with you through the process. When I taught this class 2 years ago, we had 5 or 6 people in the class maybe submit and get those published. It's pretty cool. And you get a byline in the journal and all that. It's pretty neat. And you all read examples of those from students in the class earlier in the semester. So let me know about that. And I ask you in one of the Google surveys when you submit if you're interested in doing that. The first step is you have to find a paper. There's a PDF up in Blackboard right now that looks like this, primary literature assignment number 2. And you'll see here that your first step that's due by Wednesday, so this is something that's due before Wednesday, is to tell me what paper you think you might want to do your review on. Because before you do all the work, I want to read it and make sure that it's a suitable research paper to do this on. Sometimes research papers are just like a report. They can be something like a natural history note, for example. We saw a Port Arthur's lizard eating a noodle. And that's really cool. And that's kind of interesting, but it's not like a scientific paper that you're going to write a summary of, right? That's actually a recent, it was cheese, Parmesan cheese too. So please fill out this form. This PDF is in Blackboard. You can submit this form. All it asks you for is a citation of the work and then a link to that journal article. I just want to check all these off before you dive in and work on it, make sure they're acceptable for the assignment. Then once I approve it, you'll work through and you'll do all this stuff here. And you'll submit it following this Google document like you did before. So all of that information is there. And just keep in mind, if you want to do, if you're interested in doing, let's see, where am I? Submitting to the Herp review, then make sure you're picking a more recent paper. Carissa, go ahead. Oh, I'm glad you asked that. I didn't specify that. Yes. There are rules around the paper. So it needs to be in reptiles or amphibians. I didn't say that on here, but I'm assuming that you got that. And I want you to pick out a paper that's either on functional morphology or thermal biology. So those are the 2 kind of topics du jour of the day that we're going to focus on. And if it doesn't have to, it can be loosely related to those topics. That's okay. The important thing to me is that it's a recent research paper that is a full research paper, not just like an observation or something. Does that answer your question? Great question. Ethan, question. What's that? You had your hand up, didn't you? Who else had, there was a second hand? Oh, is this guy over here? Look at this guy's always got his hand up back there. Okay, cool. Other questions about primary lit assignment number 2? Okay. Next order of business before we hop outside is Mud Puppies Take 4. It looks like all of you have submitted the form. Am I right? Did anyone not do it? Okay, good. Let's take a quick look and make sure we've got good van coverage. And I think we do. Chase has graciously volunteered to drive the van. Where are we here? Responses. No. Chase has graciously agreed to drive the van during the day, and Judy's going to drive one in the evening. Right now, it looks like we've got 14 people going during the day on Wednesday, so we're great. That 2 vans, no problem. With a few of you going to drive yourself, that's fine too. And then here, I've got 10 people in the van in the evening, so we're good. So note that we will depart. We're going to meet just downstairs. We're not even going to go to this room. We'll just meet downstairs in the parking lot of the Science Center at 2:10 and try to get away right from there. Those of you that are driving, I'll make sure I send out another map. We can send out a map on the group me chat, and you can meet us down there. My goal is to get us there right about 2:30, probably 2:35, depending. It's about a 20-25-minute drive down to Lewis Center. Those of you going in the evening, note that the time is actually later. Where are we here? Because of daylight hours, they're nocturnal. So we're actually not going to depart till 7:30. And we're going to get back accordingly a little bit later too. That's different. The original time for the evening departure was earlier because it was darker when it was January and we tried to go for the first time. So just keep that in mind. And again, we'll meet in the parking lot and just head out straight from there. Questions on the logistics of that? Yep, go ahead, Nebraska.
So if it's like stormy, because it's supposed to storm all day tomorrow.
Oh,
and
you're
all day
kidding me.
Wednesday.
Is it really?
Yeah. So I think there's like an 80% chance of it storming while we're in class on Wednesday. So if it's completely thunderstorming, will we still go?
No, we
So
won't.
everything's like tomorrow, 90 on Wednesday. I'm really sorry. I was just wondering, like, if it's storming, should we bring a poncho?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a light rain, we'll go out. If it's thunder and lightning, we won't. The main thing though is if it's raining all day tomorrow and into Wednesday, the water levels are gonna be really high. We won't be able to go. So be prepared Wednesday to just have regular class as well. With that in mind, we'll see. I mean, it's all we can do is just maybe we can,
Maybe we're not supposed to do Wednesdays. Yeah.
or any day.
It's Wednesday of next week looks nice.
Okay,
It's
okay.
also a week out.
It's supposed to be,
Yeah.
It's also supposed to be nice.
What happens if we just like randomly
It is
text
supposed to
everyone and
snow
be like,
now.
Yeah, I will be in touch with Ryan. I will give you as much advance notice as possible. Be prepared though, in the event that the water levels are high. We'll have class in here on Wednesday and we've got a lot of stuff to cover. We'll just continue with this and then we'll try to reschedule the trip as soon as we can. So, yep, there's nothing to be done. So just as a reminder, some fieldwork expectations. Oh, I have one more added expectation. Just ask questions if you're not sure. Remember that we're going to wear warm clothes. We're going to be outside. We'll get some waders and stuff ready. We'll see how the weather does, of course, but we'll have that. We will disinfect your footwear once we get there. I'll bring the chlorine spray. We'll take care of that. And just be ready to participate and ask questions. So I just want to make sure you're prepared for that. Bring a water bottle, or if you want to bring snacks or something like that, that's totally fine as well. We should have plenty of space. I have two 12-passenger vans, so we shouldn't be too crowded in the vans. It should be just fine. Questions on that stuff? Okay. I have added an assignment with this as well. And with this and all of our field outings, or our class-long field outings, you're going to have a field outing reflection that's due within 2 days of the field outing. And so that's going to be worth 10 class points. It's on your class program for next week. And basically what I'm going to ask you to do is to reflect on your experience doing field work. What study was it? What data were being collected? What did you do to participate? What questions do you have? That kind of stuff. So those surveys are due. And so this one, if the field trip happens on Wednesday, this will be due on Friday. And the reason for that, is that it's easier to do reflection when something is fresh in your mind. I don't want you to wait a week and then try to do it. So we'll do it within 48 hours. Go ahead. Good question. When you're on the trip, no. I don't have a requirement for that. If you wanted to bring a pad or your phone and take notes or whatever, that could help, but there's nothing specific you have to write.
So sorry, when is this due?
It's due within 48 hours of the trip. So it's due by Friday. I mean, I'm not going to be I'm not going to be like, oh, it's 2:10, 2:11. You submitted your function. It's by the end of the day, Friday. We'll say that. That's fine. And all of this, again, is in your class program, which is posted and available to you now. So having said that about field outings, as I had said earlier in the semester, we should always be ready to go outside. Oops. Oh, let me make one more announcement actually first. Just a reminder, next Monday, I'm not going to have open hours. Normally I do between noon and 2 before class on Mondays. I'm not going to do it next Monday. I have to meet with, you probably are all familiar. Well, a lot of you are seniors, but we have to schedule classes for the fall and you meet with all my advisees. So I need to do that during office hour or open hours time. So I won't have open hours next month. All right, talking about field outings. I mentioned beginning of semester, we should always be ready to go out and give you lots of advance notice. I decided an hour before class today, there was actually good conditions to see snakes. So we're going to go walk down and see snakes today. Now, for today's outing, you can participate and see things basically from walking on the sidewalks on campus. So you're fine for today. We're not going to go traipsing in the creek or whatever, unless you really want to. However, this is a good reminder that the weather is starting to look nice, and I will take us on spontaneous outings as weather permits. So please be ready to be out. You don't have to be ready for like a jungle adventure in class, but just be ready to at least like walk across the grass in areas by the creek, a little bit of rocks or mud or something like that. Not, just be ready for that kind of thing. What we're going to do today is I'm going to walk us down to where the water snakes are generally sighted by the creek. I know some spots where they generally hibernate. Today, they'll come out from hibernation and bask a little bit. We're just going to see if they're out. Not going to do any data collection or anything like that, but just see what we see and maybe try to catch one or two. We can see if they're marked from years past and just talk about their ecology a little bit. We have enough time to walk down there and take a walk on. We'll actually be good. If you want to leave stuff here, you can. If you want to bring it with you and just leave from there, that's fine. But we definitely have time to at least take a walk around where they normally are before class ends at 4. Sound good, everybody? All right, let's do that. Yo.